Hey everybody, today I wanted to talk about a game called Days Gone. Now, I've heard a lot about this game, especially when it came out, mostly a lot of negativity then, but over the years since it was released back in 2019, things have been changing, and now it seems to have a pretty solid fan base around it, and it's gained mostly positive reviews. I'm going to be playing this game with no knowledge of the story and very little of the gameplay. I'll be talking about the whole story and giving my thoughts on the gameplay and story as it happens, so be warned, major spoiler warning ahead, because today I'm going to be evaluating Days Gone in its entirety. So buckle up, it's going to be a long one. As the game starts off, we're offered a good opening cinematic of what seems to be the first few moments of the outbreak of whatever this virus is. And this is also where we're introduced to our main character, Deacon St. John, his friend Boozman, and his wife Sarah. In the opening scene, it seems like Sarah has been stabbed and Deacon has to get her onto this helicopter, but ends up leaving her to make sure his friend Boozer gets to safety, but not before leaving her with his ring and making her promise to give it back when they see each other again. After this opening cutscene, we're launched like 2 years into the future, and I'm given control of my character, where I get to ride a motorcycle. Now, in this game, the main form of transportation is motorcycles, which fits surprisingly better than I thought it would. Given the background of the characters being in a motorcycle club, I thought it could have been a bit cheesy and cringy, but it works really well in the gameplay. Riding the motorcycles did take quite some time to get used to on mouse and keyboard, but I eventually got the hang of it. We start out the game by having to chase down this character named Leon, and this whole section feels more like a tutorial than anything else. During the mission, we're taught how to craft, heal, track, and by the end, we're introduced to what we're dealing with in this game. By that, I mean, we see a giant-ass horde of zombies. I later learned that they call them freakers in the game, which I still find to be a strange name. So Boozer and Deacon end up chasing the Leon guy down, and it gives them a map to some hidden cache that's buried in a cemetery. And due to Leon being hurt, I think Boozer shot him. Instead of leaving him to die by the freakers, Deacon decides to shoot him almost as a sign of compassion, even for a guy that's kind of a bad guy like Leon. And this is going to be one of the main traits of Deacon. He's willing to do something awful like kill somebody in order to not let them suffer in his mind. After this, Boozer and Deacon go to leave, but Deacon's bike's been destroyed. They also had to travel through a tunnel, and this is where the game teaches you how combat works. Inside the tunnel, I learned that these so-called freakers build these really gross nests out of their own excrement, and you have to use fire to burn them down to get rid of the infestation. After a fairly long sequence of fighting through the tunnel, we made it to a place called Ol' Willie's, and I'm left alone to sneak through the place to get a bike part to fix the bike. While playing this, it was genuinely pretty freaky, and that feeling took quite a while to go away. These so-called freakers are pretty well done and progressively get stronger just like you do. The noises they make, just even when you're riding your bike and you hear them going, yeah! It's pretty scary sometimes. It's not like horror game scary, but it's like, oh, I don't want to get off the bike. Anyway, I made my way through the mess and ended up finding the bike part. But let me tell you, the combat feels so-so. It feels pretty good, but it's also difficult to aim because the reticle bloom takes almost forever to shrink. I do really like the way the freakers act in fights. They're genuinely difficult to deal with, the way they move around and such. After grabbing the bike part, Deacon tried to meet back up with Boozer, but it turns out the Boozer was getting beat up and tortured by these weirdos. They're a big faction in the game that call themselves the Rippers. We'll get back to them later. Here's where I get my first taste of combat against human NPCs, which I had a good reason because these weirdos literally burnt out of my boy Boozman's arm. After taking the Rippers out, me and Boozman get chased away by a massive horde of zombies. I really hope the zombie hordes aren't as big in this game as they were in that cutscene, because that would look almost impossible to deal with. So let's talk about NPC combat. When you're fighting human NPCs, it's actually quite a bit harder than the zombies. The zombies will run at you and try to get in melee range, but some of the NPCs have some pretty cheesy weapons, especially throughout the game, and they definitely bring more of a challenge than the freakers, especially early on when you're struggling with ammo. So after fighting them, Deacon then took Boozer back to their base, which was a big lookout tower, and he was then forced to go find his bike. It was also at this point he had to go out and look for something to help Boozer out because of his burnt arm. While leaving the camp on foot, I had to chase down some creep who turns out was working with some people to raid our base later. This was actually fairly difficult. They all had rifles, but slowly I managed. Combat will definitely take a minute to get used to. I finally made my way over to where Deke left his bike, only to find out it was missing, and almost like deja vu, I see another weirdo running running off into the woods and chased him down, only to follow him back to some big camp. Now, this is the first camp you discover, run by some guy named Copeland. All the camps in the game work out to do different things for you. Copeland's camp lets you upgrade your motorcycle, while others could sell you better weapons and such. So back to the story. The guys that work for Copeland's camp found Deacon's motorcycle and decided to go ahead and salvage it. They have a bad tendency to do that in this story. I'm then given some really junk bike in return that I'm supposed to upgrade throughout the story. While leaving the camp, I leveled up and I'm taught about skill points, and there's a ton of ways to spend them. After reading through them all, it seems like a pretty interesting way to make Deke stronger, and I genuinely like the system. I then took my new junk motorcycle and went to go get some sterile bandages for Boozer's arm, and I headed back to give them to him. After getting Boozer's arm cleaned up, I had a couple different missions to do. Most of these just seemed more like side missions where I had to go fight some human NPCs at a camp and clear them out. Also, this is the point where we start a pretty long arc in the story where Boozer's literally losing his mind and not in good shape. So our boy Deke here has to keep him alive. The plan the two have after he gets done healing up is to ride north and leave the place, but his injury is definitely putting a halt to that. And after the side missions, I get to take the map that I got from Leon and headed off to the cemetery. This mission was actually pretty hard because I didn't have any ammo with me, and at the cemetery there happened to be a ton of freakers. I'm definitely making a habit of not having any ammo in the early game. By the end of the mission, I saw a helicopter flying off, and it looked an awful lot like the one that I saw in the very first cutscene of the game. After following it for a while, I had to spy on some Nero agents and listen in. This is a pretty frequent activity in the story of this game. Nero seems to have some spooky dealings with the virus, and you slowly figure out what they're doing. We'll get back to that later, but for now, the scientists were talking about the freakers evolving into different versions of them. I've yet to see any at this point. One of the agents even mentions that these things are nocturnal, so I probably shouldn't be riding around at night. I proceeded to follow that all up with clearing some nests around areas, and I even went to go upgrade my bike. The motorcycle upgrade system in the game is pretty cool. I actually kind of grew attached to the bike that I had by the end, almost like it was my horse in Red Dead Redemption 2. This almost seems better because unlike the horses in Red Dead Redemption 2, you can change all the parts out for your bike and slowly upgrade them over time, and also put a bunch of cool paints and wraps on it. This was also a solid point in the game where I really started to enjoy the driving system in the game. The way your motorcycle controls on and off the road, with all the sharp turns and bounces whenever you hit bumps, is honestly way better than I expected, and it's pretty fun to travel between areas. So after that little layover, I had to go to a new camp run by a woman named Tucker, and I got a few missions from her. During this, I got an option to give the stash of pharmaceuticals to either her camp or Copeland's. This isn't a story-defining option of who you choose. All it does is decide who you get more things from. So there's a mechanic in the game called trust. At each camp, you have a trust level, and that decides what you can upgrade. So at Tucker's camp, you can buy new weapons depending on your trust level, and at Copeland's camp, you can upgrade your bike with new parts. You also earn money, depending on the missions you do, for different camps. Knowing this, I decided to go ahead and turn it into Copeland's camp, because I figured having a better motorcycle might be more well-suited for this early game. Getting that out of the way, I went to go clear out this old Nero site. The area was overrun by freakers, and I later learned that there was a little memorial for Deke's wife Sarah, which was followed with a bunch of flashbacks of the outbreak, most of which I'd already seen. So right now it seems that Deacon's wife died when leaving on the helicopter, and just as soon as those ended, I saw another Nero helicopter flying around and decided to follow it. After following them for a little while, they landed, and I saw them doing some weird to this little zombie. I guess they were running tests on it, but then this giant horde came out of nowhere and they hurriedly flew away, but not without leaving some things behind. One of the things they left behind was one of their radios, which becomes a pretty important piece of the story. And just like that, more flashbacks to Deacon's wife. I'd like to spend a minute talking about these cutscenes throughout the story of Deke and his wife. All these cutscenes really play an important role in character development for both Deacon and his wife, and you also get a good idea of who they were before the story of the game. It also manages to give you an emotional connection to the characters, which I found to be really nice. This cutscene, for instance, was one of them both meeting each other for the very first time, and it was a pretty heartwarming cutscene. Honestly, the whole story between the two is, but after the cutscene, I was left with a feeling that she's somehow involved in this freaker mess, because it was mentioned she worked at some strange biotech company as a researcher. And so far, I've been playing this game for several hours now. I gotta say, I'm pretty interested in the story. I'm also enjoying it quite a bit. The game's definitely left me with a lot of excitement to unlock new weapons and upgrade my motorcycle, so it hits in multiple ways. We have progression, we have story, we have character development, and a good dose of mystery. This was aided on by me accidentally walking into a cave and getting spooked by a giant horde unexpectedly. then brutally murdered by said horde. I didn't have any of this recorded because it just happened at an instant. After the horde incident, I had a really crazy mission where I needed to save this little girl named Lisa, who has a pretty brutal background story. She's been living on her own for the past 2 years, waiting for her parents to come back. Honestly, pretty sad. And during the mission, I had to save her. But by doing this, I had to take on a bunch of different enemies, including a lot of freakers and human NPCs, but not limited to a giant bear. The bear didn't go down easy whatsoever. I did manage in the end, but my god, was that tough. I then took the little girl back to camp so she could be safe. After that, I continued to track down some more Nero helicopters, and I actually found the O'Brien guy from the beginning cutscene. He's the one that let Deacon's wife on the helicopter. Deacon proceeded to threaten him, and he said he'd keep in contact with Deacon and help him find out what happened to his wife. After that, I went to some of the Nero camps that are scattered around the map, because turning on the generator at those for some reason gains you a bunch of trust at the camps. While doing this though, I ran into another horde, and this time I actually decided to take it on. I used some rather cheesy methods, which included throwing pipe bombs and Molotovs into the group, after which I actually managed to clear it, which gave me quite a bit of confidence into fighting hordes later on in the game. Then Deacon talked to Boozer again, and he just seems to get more sick, which causes another flashback to Deacon and his wife. The flashback was used to teach me that lavender can help burns, so I had to go collect some to help him out. And after the lavender debacle, I got a call from Tucker's hot spring camps. She told me that they had just gotten raided, and the little girl I just saved earlier was kidnapped. This becomes a rather common occurrence between you and this little girl. She causes a mess, you have to go clean it up. I hurriedly went over there and saved the girl, and after listening to her complain, Deacon told her that he'd take her to a different camp since she doesn't like it at the hot springs. And this is where we're introduced to another camp, Iron Mike's camp at Lost Lake. Now, this camp seems to have some history before the game between Deacon and Boozer. During the mission, Deke radios a girl named Ricky at the camp, and I learned that Deke and Boozer are not allowed back to Lost Lake, so I guess I'm not unlocking a new camp. On a positive note, maybe the kid will have a nice home, since Tucker's camp seems to be a slave camp. After taking Lisa over to Ricky, I got level 2 trust at Tucker's camp, and I was finally able to buy some new guns. The new rifle I got actually ended up working really well because I didn't really care for the AK that I'd had. I then had a mission to go back to the lookout tower base, and Boozer completely lost his and tried to shoot Deacon. Turns out Boozer has blood poisoning and needs medical attention as soon as possible. Deacon slowly urged him to get on his bike and then took him over to Lost Lake, where I just mentioned they're both not allowed to be there. Because of this, I had to sneak in, and the stealth in this mission is pretty annoying. Let's just say that. Anyway, I had to sneak into the doctor's office and steal some medicine. I ended up getting caught though, but I guess it was all good because we were just magically allowed back into camp. It also turns out that Lisa decided to go ahead and run away again. Like, this little girl's honestly too much throughout the story. I actually dislike her. Anyway, as it turns out, Iron Mike and Lost Lake need Deacon and Boozer as much as they really need them. So I guess we'll be staying here until Boozer heals up, which means we unlocked another camp. At this point, I'd like to bring up that all the characters that I've met throughout the game, at least most of them, are fairly interesting, especially when you learn more about their past and when you learn more about them throughout missions. So as the game goes on, the characters are definitely a high point. Now, let's talk about what Lost Lake Camp offers, especially over the other two camps. So for starters, Lost Lake offers both motorcycle upgrades and better guns, so that's always good. Especially when I was hoping there would be more things to unlock in this game. I do kind of wish they weren't all secluded to just one camp and that all camps had the same upgrades, but I kind of get why the system's in place. I also want to talk about how the game decides to change things up by bringing in new characters and just a different type of story every time things begin to get a little bit stale. Especially at this point where I'm pretty excited to see where the story goes, especially as I learn more about the Freakers and the changes they're undergoing, and the mystery around Deacon's wife begins to unravel. But anyway, I was introduced to a new character, Addie, who's a doctor for the camp, and I was given my first mission at the new camp. She wanted me to track down some stuff for the infirmary, markedly a Civil War era knife for amputations. That'll definitely come into play later. For the mission, I had to go to the closest town to find it, and decided to just clear the nests while I was there at the same time. After that, I was called by O'Brien. He wants me to start doing some missions for him while he tracks down info on Sarah, and he didn't give me any new info just yet. During the first mission for O'Brien, I learned that the Freakers are evolving into new, stronger versions just like earlier, supposedly at a startling rate. I still haven't seen that come into play, but it does sound like it'll be pretty fun to deal with later. I am left to wonder what Nero is doing exactly, and why Brian wants me to spy on people that he works with. After this, I got another mission to go look for that Lisa girl. What is this, like 3 times? I didn't actually find her, but I did notice she was staying in this area. When I left though, there was was a giant group of guys I had to shoot, and that caused a giant horde to come in, and they obliterated me. It was really around this point when I was noticing that nighttime was becoming more and more dangerous, so I pretty much altogether stopped traveling at night. So after the failed mission, I arrived back at camp, and I found out that Boozman's not doing well. He's in pretty rough shape, which in turn leads to a guy named Schizo telling me that he knows an area where I could find some medicine for him. Now, this Schizo character, he's a pretty important character in our story, not always for the right reasons. I figure you could probably tell since he wants us to go behind Iron Mike's back and break an alliance they have with the Rippers because the medicine happens to be in their territory. Even knowing all this, Deke jumped at the opportunity to save his friend, and let me tell you, the mission to get the antibiotics was really rough, and it was because of this guy. This is our first instance of running into a mutated version of Freakers. This one's called a Breaker, and it's like if you decided to start injecting Freakers with Trenbolone and male elephant semen. Well, you get this. Fighting this thing actually took me quite a few attempts, probably around 5 or 6. I mean, I am playing on hard difficulty, but I didn't expect the mutated zombies to be this strong. The fight overall was intense though, I enjoyed it. After that fight, I went off with the medicine in tow, and all for naught, because it turns out when I made it back to camp, Boozer needed to get his arm amputated anyway. I mean, I kinda saw this coming, noticing I needed to track down that tool for amputation earlier, but still a rather somber moment. It also turns out that Iron Mike learned of the raid I did on Ripper territory, and the Rippers also know it was Deacon who did it. Iron Mike said something pretty cool at the end, probably the only cool thing he says in his entire arc, where he tells Deke that he's writing checks with other men's blood. I kinda liked that. After all that camp drama, I went back to working for O'Brien, and the scientist I snooped on this time said that the virus seems to be created for this specific purpose, which gives me the idea that this virus was made by someone in a laboratory, making my suspicions on Sarah's job more serious. Then for a little while after, I just did some side missions in order to gain trust and money, mostly killing Rippers. They really seem to be everywhere in this game, and annoying literally everybody. The next main story mission I did was with Iron Mike. We ran into this really big horde, like a train of zombies. During the mission, Deacon comes up with a pretty cool plan to blow up the caves because the Freakers hibernate in them during the day, and it might throw them off or slow them down, so they aren't as big of a problem in the area, which leads to Deacon and Mike setting off on a trip into town to figure out where they could find some TNT to get that done. During this mission, we get quite a bit of background on Iron Mike's character, where we notice a strange shootout that happened in this building that's holding the map to the TNT that we need to find. Mike says something about how only 2 people made it out of this room alive, and he was one of them. I don't think there's much more story beyond that, but it does make his virtuous ways seem a little strange, with a dark past. I then went back and saw Boozer for the first time since the whole arm incident, and he's definitely missing an arm now. I wonder how he'll manage to ride a motorcycle without the arm and all, but maybe it'll work out. After that, I went and did another uneventful mission for O'Brien where I learned nothing. When I got back to camp, Ricky asked Deacon if he would go help her go check out some hydro dam to figure out why it's not producing power for the area. Not only did this mission genuinely sound interesting, but it actually was. I got some really good dialogue with Ricky, learning about her past and her trying to get Deacon to open up about his. When we arrived at the hydro dam, she ended up finding a clog in the water and cleared it out. Then we went inside the dam, and it turns out it wasn't working because some freakers had gotten in there and managed to infest the place. We had to burn them all out, and just when we were getting ready to leave, a group of Rippers showed up, and we had to take care of some business. It was at this point I thought that the Rippers were purposefully going after Deke due to what happened in the past, you know, with the whole raiding their camp and such. I also want to add that I like the Rippers as an enemy in this game. They're about everything you could want in an enemy. They're absolutely bat crazy, they're super evil, and they do really demented. What more would it take to make you want to kill something? But anyway, after leaving on the way back to Lost Lake, Deke was talking to Ricky and finally opened up about his time in Afghanistan, in the army, and how he managed to get into his MC, which gave Deke some interesting background, and making me like the character more. This mission was definitely a really good one. After the dam mission, I went to our old base to go get Boozer his bike back to try to cheer him up, cause he's not taking the loss of his arm very well. And then it was time to go after another Nero field op team. After the mission, O'Brien asked if the researcher was male or female, which I guess tries to make you think that maybe one of them was Deke's wife. I don't know, I'm just hoping that he gets to some info on Deke's wife soon, because that's a story I'd really like to see play out. Also, I wanted to talk about how there's some missions in this game that just don't make sense. Here I get a mission titled Go Check on Boozman and Catch Up, which consisted of me speaking 3 words to him and the mission was over. Like, why was that a mission? I guess it's free money and experience. After that short mission, Schizo decides to approach Deacon, saying he knows where to find some TNT. He said it's in some old mine, but I have to do the mission with him because I guess he doesn't trust him. Now, personally, I really don't trust Schizo. He kind of seems like a snake. Anyway, we end up making it to the mines, and while down there, part of it collapses on us, which, yeah, everyone would have seen that coming. But when we got deeper into the mines, we had to deal with some freaks. It was actually a pretty fun mission, but I did get to see another reason not to trust Schizo. The man sees all these freaks coming towards us in a dark mine that, they like to sleep in, and decides to just start blasting off shots with his pistol. The guy really is a loose cannon and will probably backstab Deke, I'm calling it now. Anyway, they find the TNT and make it out of the mines, and Schizo decides to come up with a proposition for Deke, saying that him and Deacon should run the camp together because Iron Mike is too soft. Of course, Deke says no, because why would you be a snake and turn on Iron Mike? Even though I don't personally like Iron Mike, that isn't a cool thing to do. And who would want to run anything with Schizo? After that mission, I made it back to camp, and I learned that Boozer decided to run off, and Schizo did nothing to stop him. So Boozer's just running around with one arm, drinking and feeling sad, and that's not really a good combo when there's a bunch of zombies running around. While running about looking for him, I managed to run into my first screamer. Now, these zombies are pretty annoying because they scream and not only draw in other zombies, but the scream also really messes up your screen for a few seconds. By the end of the mission, we get a good cutscene where Deacon ends up saving Boozer. I'll just have you watch it for yourself.
I found you halfway through a case of whiskey. You were gonna drink yourself to death. What did I say to you?
You grabbed the bottle, and you chugged it. It was a lot of goddamn whiskey. And you told me that if I was gonna drink myself to death, you'd be right there with me.
I think this really sheds light on how close Deacon and Boozer are as friends, and I'm glad the developers decided to add things like this. I'd personally like even more of this throughout the story. Deacon also gave an idea to Ricky that they could create some type of blade arm for Boozer, so I went off to find the parts for that. When she made it for him, he seemed to really like it, although he did seem a little dangerous with it. I then got a call from O'Brien saying he has one last job for Deacon, and Deke decides to bring Boozer along. This was also cool because we've not done anything with Boozer since the game started, and all the missions where you have another character following you around all have really good dialogue that make the missions 10 times better. I mean, I've been running around trying to save this guy ever since the game started, so it's kind of nice having him around so the character can actually develop. During the mission, what do you know, I had to go sneak around and spy on some scientists, but after that, I had to go meet up with O'Brien. He said he had info on Sarah, so let's go. He tells Deacon that Sarah ended up making a recovery at a different camp, but then it got overrun with all these infected who wandered up over Highway 97, and there were no survivors. I like this moment because it's the first time they mention in the story that other states had the virus, so it gives confirmation on the fact that the virus is affecting the whole country, or world. After learning that, I went and walked back to the bike to meet up with Boozman, but he was gone, so I had to track him down again. As it turns out, he was chasing down some rippers. He explained that these rippers were just senselessly killing healthy dogs because, they're just awful, I guess. We even get a sad scene where Deke ends up putting this poor little dog out of its pain, and yeah, that happened. After killing a bunch of rippers, Boozer ends up pressing Deke on what he learned, and the two end up getting into an argument. Boozer thinks Deke needs to stop being so hung up on his wife. Honestly, the scene's much more than that. It was pretty funny and kinda sad at the same time. The writing for the main characters in this game is really good, which kind of makes me wonder how certain characters are just so ass. This next mission then leads off with Deacon going back to this old church, where he witnesses flashbacks of him and Sarah getting married. Abruptly, the heartwarming scene was ended by the sounds of bikes outside the church. Before entering, I ended up killing some dickheads that were inside of it, and then they come back and try to fight me. I quickly killed them, but let's talk about the cutscenes with Deke and his wife. I think the voice acting and the writing and overall atmosphere of all these cutscenes really adds a lot to Deacon as a character. You can even lend that over to the ones with him and Boozer. For the character's sake, I really hope that Sarah manages to be alive, because all these flashbacks just to find out she's dead might make me kind of sad. And by the end, we get a pretty strong moment for Deacon where he decides to go ahead and let it all go and burns the church down, actually taking Boozer's advice, letting go of his dead wife. Now, let's talk about something that was really starting to annoy me. So the game doesn't always have these missions that are full of dialogue and great storytelling, and at some point in the game, you even have to do these jobs in order for the main storyline to progress. Now, these jobs do help you out by giving you trust and some money through these camps, but my God, are they boring? It goes like this. Some person did this, so you have to chase them down, and by chasing them down, you have to shoot at their bike. Really bad design. Or it goes like this. These people came and raided us, or maybe they kidnapped somebody, so now go attack their camp and clear out these enemies. Or someone's missing, so go search an area for them, and almost all these missions just sort of feel like filler. I feel like they definitely could have added more trust and money to the main missions and just completely got rid of these. Or at least give them some dialogue and story so that they're not quite so cookie cutter and boring. They always just come up with a random name like, oh, Ezekiel Jackson got kidnapped, go save him. I don't give a about this guy. You talk to him once, and then you never hear about this guy again or see him. There was maybe 1 or 2 of these missions that actually had any interesting thing happen, but most of that was honestly just due to the camp that I had to go attack was cool looking, or I ended up running into a new type of enemy that was kind of interesting at the time. I also dislike how you have to travel so far to do these missions, so I have to end up backtracking all the way back to a camp that's way across the map and there's no story missions close to it in order to activate this mission, and then travel even further away to go do the boring mission, and then travel back, where there will inevitably be nothing there for me to do, so now I have to travel back to where the story missions are. It's just a lot of backtracking for absolutely nothing. Anyway, not a fan of those, and I wish sometimes they didn't feel so important because you need to unlock a new gun or something. I think I'd rather just be learning more about the virus in general, or the characters in the game. Hell, you could even write a character that was somehow in Deke or Boozer's past that had wronged him and now he has to go after them. It's just really lazy. Maybe you have to track down some enemy who was involved in hurting another character at camp who's semi-important, and you end up learning more about the character through this. All of that would have been better than what we're left with, which just feel like radiant, boring missions that you almost feel forced to do in order to unlock things. So, getting that out of the way, there was a moment earlier in the game where me and Ricky went to go fix that hydro dam, but on the way back to camp, we saw that there was a power line that was messed up and keeping the power from reaching Lost Lake. So, Ricky asked Deke to come help her fix it. This was a pretty interesting mission, mostly in design, where while she's up on the pole trying to fix the power line, a bunch of newts, which are a different zombie type, they're literally just zombie children, were trying to attack her. And even after fixing the line, we got a decent cutscene where Iron Mike was talking to the camp, and even gave Deacon a bunch of credit for helping the camp out since he's gotten back. Here's a cutscene that I didn't really care for. After this mission, Ricky decides to take a look at Deke at the infirmary since Addie was gone to help him clean up a cut that he got, and it gets a little flirty on her end. I don't see really any point in trying to add a new love interest into the game that doesn't go anywhere, especially when she's dating somebody else that's important to the story. It does lead to something fairly interesting where we see Schizo seeing in on it, and this comes up later because Addie, the doctor who's dating Ricky, we have an interesting moment where Addie almost subtly hints that she knows that something's going on between you and Ricky, which isn't true, but it definitely gives you the hint that Schizo's a snake before. I don't know if the writers were trying to make it to where Deke looked better for kind of declining her advances or what, but when we have all these cutscenes showing how much that Deacon and his wife love each other, and how sweet they are to each other, I feel like it was just kind of out of place. Anyway, after this, I got a pretty cute mission where I had to track down a puppy that someone saw, so I could save it and give it to Boozer to hopefully cheer him up, and it was pretty adorable. Boozer honestly seemed happier. Here we progress even deeper into Schizo being a snake, where he comes up to Deacon with a secret that he supposedly knows where to find some detonation cord for the TNT. It happens to be deep inside Ripper territory, you know, again. Even with him and Deacon knowing that Iron Mike and the Ripper leader Carlos have supposedly had a treaty, this kinda seems a little fishy. I mean, I personally don't give a about the treaty. I personally hope all the Rippers end up getting murdered very grisly by Deacon. They're disgusting, but I do think it's a bad idea to break the treaty for the second time. Instead of listening to his gut, Deke decides to go ahead and trust Schizo, mistake, and hides this from Iron Mike, knowing full well, if we are caught, it will start a war. The mission was actually pretty cool though. Deacon and Schizo had to make their way through the Ripper camp without being seen, and we actually get a pretty good look at how insane these people are, because Deacon and Schizo see some Rippers tie a poor girl up and blow their air horns in order to pull some freakers in. So they walk up to the poor girl trying to help her out and cut her down, and they notice that the Rippers had purposefully broken both her legs, so she was just kind of Deke decides to do one of the hardest things you could imagine and just kills the girl as to not let her get ripped apart by these things. I mean, there's compassion there, but it's still a pretty sad scene. While making our way through, we also see the Rippers hobbling around and pretending to be freakers. I have no clue what's wrong with these people, but they seem to actually worship the zombies. Anyway, we managed to make it to this building. Deke ends up getting stuck inside and has to fight a bunch of newts. It was actually a pretty creepy scene. They make their way over to the det cords, and right as soon as they were about to leave, it's revealed that Schizo was purposefully bringing Deke here to turn on him. He pretty much used Deke as a bargaining piece to save Lost Lake. I mean, I didn't expect anything else from the scumbag, so I just can't wait to see Deke murder him. I really hope there comes a time when that happens. We're then awakened after being knocked out by these people, and it's revealed that the leader of the Rippers is actually an ex-MC member of the Mongrels, which was Deacon and Boozer's club. He was kicked out. You could tell that by how they burnt off his tattoo on his back, and we then learn that the guy's known about Deacon Boozer for quite a while, which gives an explanation for the first scene where the Rippers decide to go ahead and burn the tattoo off of Boozer's arm. Anyway, the leader Carlos, or as he was known before, Jesse, decides to leave and tells Deke that he's going to end up getting Boozer too, but Before he could come back, out of nowhere, the little girl Lisa from earlier shows up. As much as I hate her, she decides to help Deke escape. I then get to sneak around camp stabbing Rippers until I make my way to where my at. When I get there, I notice the Rippers decided to go ahead and attack Lisa because they suspect she's the one that set Deacon free, where I get a pretty not safe for YouTube scene where Deacon just brutally murders one of these guys and pretty much tells Lisa to get the hell out of there. He then grabs all his gear and I got to shoot my way back to Lost Lake. When I arrived at Lost Lake, I noticed the Rippers had gotten there first and decided to burn it down and start killing a bunch of people. Even though Schizo was supposed to make a new treaty with us, I ended up fighting my way through, saving other people, until I made it to Iron Mike's house, where I was hit with a misdirect. In this cutscene, Iron Mike almost sounds like he was listening to Carlos and was going to sell Deke and Boozer out, until this happens.
What he says true about you making a deal?
Only lost tell lies. Yeah, it's true.
Okay, we give you Deke, William, biker boats, whatever the you want to call them. But you leave Lost Lake alone. The R.I.P.
Hey, we come here under a flag of truce.
Truce my ass! This is my camp, my people. You don't come here with some blood-stained flag of truce and demand. Not from me. I don't care what you think these boys have done. I don't care why you want them. All I know is you're not
We
crazy.
had a deal.
No, this is the deal, Carlos. And it's the only one you're getting. Now you take your people and you get the hell out of Lost Lake. Or we all die together, right here, right now.
No treaty stands.
Always has, from where I'm standing.
You son of a bitch!
All right. Hey, we ain't through. Carlos.
Get low, brother.
Deke, stand aside. Stand aside!
Mike, look, I just want to say...
Hell, he even has Schizo locked up for what he did to Deacon. I didn't think that stealing some det cords and TNT from the Rippers would have let all this crazy shit unfold, but it did. After all that, Deacon ends up meeting with Boozer, coming up with a plan to go behind everyone's back at camp to kill the Rippers, and Jesse, or as we've known him, Carlos. You could tell by the way they're talking to each other that there's going to be hell to pay. Plan for revenge goes like this. They're going to take the TNT and det cords into Ripper territory and blow up the dam they have in their region in order to drown them out so they can get rid of most of them, then go in and attack Carlos. So I had to sneakily steal the TNT, and while doing so, I managed to grab a nice Dragonov in Schizo's house, which comes into play in the mission. After that, Deacon then goes and gets his arm patched up because, you know, it was just burnt by that Carlos guy. After this, he then goes through with his plan of going to meet Boozer at the cabin to go over their plan. While doing so, Ricky decides to show up, and she discovers their plan, doesn't seem too happy about it. I think it's a good plan. I can't imagine knowing that there are all these disgusting people out there, hurting people and building their numbers, also wanting to attack and steal from you, and you'd be like, oh my god, why would you do this? We have a treaty. Dude, they're pretty savage, and honestly, I don't know what you're on about, but anyway, Deacon and Boozer then ride off to go get their sweet, sweet revenge, and the mission was pretty good. You end up going over to this dam, and Boozer goes and lays the explosives, while Deacon defends him with the before-mentioned Dragonov. You then get a really cool cutscene of the dam being exploded, and a giant wave coming in, and washing the Rippers away, almost like a great flood, per se. Deacon and Boozer then make their way to the main headquarters, where I ended up running into two breakers, but with the Dragonov, I managed to two-shot one in the head, which is pretty great. We're then treated to a rather weird fight between Deacon and Carlos. The aesthetic of the fight where Carlos drugs him or something, I don't know, it almost ruined it, but it was still pretty cool watching him get stabbed to death because he sucks. On a sad note, during this mission you end up losing the Dragonov that you just got, so I guess I'll live. Deacon then goes back to camp and has what I can only say is the worst conversation in the entire game with Iron Mike. I can't stand the guy and I don't want to talk about him anymore, but I have to because he also decided to go ahead and let Schizo go because, quote, he didn't think that he'd get a fair trial. If I didn't hate the guy before, I actually wish the game would have ended by me killing him, even though he's not a real antagonist. Anyway, after that anger-inducing conversation with Mike, Deacon had some flashbacks to his wife again. Every flashback seems to get better than the last. I've never seen a love story in a game actually work and make me invested, but this one did, and I don't really understand why. After a sudden revelation of Deacon's wife having federal clearance, he goes ahead and decides to call O'Brien and have him check on Sarah, letting him know that she had federal clearance and probably wouldn't have been treated like a normal civilian. A little while later, O'Brien decides to call Deacon and tell him that he needs to meet up with him to give him something. When we get there, he ends up handing Deacon a badge, showing that she had level 4 clearance, whatever that's supposed to mean. And he tells me a story about how she was actually taken with some some group to a fort, but the fort was eventually raided by some militia like a year ago. Said the militia is located at Crater Lake. We then get another cryptic warning from O'Brien before he leaves, saying that the Freakers are evolving and the ones we've been dealing with are nothing compared to what's coming. Spooky again. I'll believe it when I see it. After arriving back at camp, I went to the next story mission, and a warning popped up on my screen that said advancing the story will temporarily lock you out from the northern regions. I don't know what that means, but I guess we'll see. During the mission, Deacon goes and talks to Iron Mike and asks him if he knew a trail that could take him over the mountains, because he mentioned in the past he knew every trail in the area. Mike said he did, and he agreed to take Deacon as long as, quote, he agreed to never coming back to the camp ever again. I don't think I'll have a problem with that, because I think if I do, I'd want to shoot the guy. It seems like it's just something Mike loves to do, is give people ultimatums like a weird controlling douche, but moving on. We then get a sad cutscene where Deacon goes and tells Boozer that he's going to be leaving, going after his maybe dead or maybe not dead wife. In the cutscene, he hands over his MC jacket to Boozer, and he looks kind of strange without it. Unlike Mike, Boozer seems to understand Deacon's predicament and wishes him good luck. I then followed Iron Mike over the mountains until we reach a specific area where he tells me I can go on along and just follow the trail. I'm left with pretty music and a pretty nice cutscene of Deacon riding over the mountains. After a while, this is ruined by gunfire, so I went to go check it out. Upon getting there, I saw something I didn't really care to see, though. I was greeted with two guys that looked like they're in a wannabe army, hiding on top of a roof from a gigantic-ass zombie bear, which I later learned was called a rager bear. Knowing that I had a hard enough time trying to fight a regular bear earlier in the story, I decided to go ahead and cheese this one a little bit by sitting on top of a car, and it couldn't get to me. I don't know if it's just the weapons I'm playing on or the difficulty, but this thing was beyond tanky. It was a complete bullet sponge. I think I used over like 400 or 500 bullets just to take this thing down, not including grenades and pipe bombs. After killing it though, the soldiers ended up getting off the roof and thanked Deacon for being their savior and told them about a militia they were in. They then escorted me over to their base. Yeah, it looks like a complete wannabe military base. The entire area of the north is completely different than what it looked like before, so it looks like we're in store for a pretty big shakeup. I then got to meet their later. Oh my god, later. Why did I read later and leader? I then got to meet the leader of the group, and while talking to him, Deacon noticed that he was wearing the ring that he gave his wife, which then causes him to not ask too many questions because I'm assuming he doesn't trust the people. He sort of just follows along and decides to go ahead and join a militia, so I guess we're joining now. Anyway, we go off on a mission where the leader wants us to help him track down some deserter named Vasquez. We end up finding this group somewhere up in the snowy mountains where they were harassing some poor girl there, and Deacon seems to have a code where he doesn't like it where people hurt women, and decides to go ahead and start fighting, even though the leader tells him not to. By the time we clear everyone out and make it to the place where this guy was holding this woman, it turns out we didn't need to do anything because she could handle herself, and we get a pretty interesting cutscene where she stabs this guy in the dick like 30 times, so maybe too brutal for YouTube. We then ride out and I get to know that the leader's name's Captain Corey. He ends up taking Deacon to the actual base at Crater Lake, but during the ride, he mentions that he thought Deke was ex-military, and they talk about their military experience. The captain ends up telling us he was in the Air Force for 10 years and was actually on vacation when the outbreak happened. He then asks a question about Deke's wife, which then causes a flashback to the past, where Deacon takes his wife to some waterfall and ends up proposing to her. The weird contrast is in the world before and after. Since you get so many flashbacks where you get to walk around in the world before the outbreak happens, you could be walking around at night, which is something I normally wouldn't do in this game because there's zombies everywhere. Now you get to walk down a path just listening to a conversation two characters are having, and the world just seems beautiful and safe, almost lulling you into a comfort until you're snapped back into reality and you have to look at this grim. After the flashback, Deacon just pretty much lies to the guy and is like, yeah, I don't have any picture of my wife and her name was Beth or something. So you can definitely feel the distrust going on here. For all he knows, these people probably killed her, so I get it. We then arrive to this gigantic outpost in the middle of the lake, and it looks crazy compared to everything else we've seen so far. The place is absolutely massive. It seems like all the broken down trees and burnt down areas we've seen since getting here have all been going over to this place because this place has like 20-foot tall walls made out of trees. After arriving, Deacon gets sworn into the militia and we meet the leader, the colonel. It seems the leader's sort of an asshole and very religious and condescending, which gives me really bad vibes. We were then taken on a tour of the place, learning the colonel actually likes Deke and it gives him some title of corporal. This really doesn't mean anything. I have to admit, I didn't expect this kind of switch up for the game. It kind of came out of nowhere. Real curveball for the story, but it's definitely interesting. Anyway, the leader shows us around and we get to meet some important people at the camp. We meet the doctor of the camp, and then we meet a guy trying to make napalm to destroy the zombies. His name's Weaver. I can't for the life of me remember what the doctor's name is, though. During all these interactions, they keep bringing up this other person they call the witch or some which really makes you feel like they're trying to allude to Deacon's wife really hard here, and yeah, this happens.
Matt, I can't do this if I have to do my own supply runs.
I got it covered. Lieutenant Whitaker, this is Corporal St. John. He's a new member of Corey's unit. He's got some experience out in...
Read this. I mean, you can't read, can you?
Active ingredients, chloroform, aterpenol, benzoyl alcohol, lactic acid.
Good enough. When can he start?
Ah, I'll leave you to it. Carry on, Lieutenant.
Leave us.
Sarah.
Stand at attention.
Sarah,
Don't. You're dead. You're dead. You're supposed to be dead.
Hey.
You're dead.
It's okay.
You're dead.
I'm right here.
Wait a second. I don't understand. I couldn't find
You
you.
had died, and
No, we were overrun.
Who's overrun?
And we had to go south. Nero, they
Yeah,
said
Nero,
that no one
no, I
made it
found
out.
O'Brien and I
Farewell
found
was
a way
overrun. They said that everybody
over the
was
mountain,
dead.
And I didn't think that
I never thought I would see you
ever see
again.
you again. Hey, listen, we can ride out of here. We'll pick a direction. We won't look back. Come on.
Please, no, Deacon. I can't.
They're forcing you to stay here.
You don't understand. We're fighting a war. Don't you see? This is a war that we can win.
I didn't come here to fight a war.
I can be helpful. I can make a difference, but I can't go with you. I have to stay here. Don't you get it? You can stay here with me. Help me. Your requisition form. Thank you, soldier.
This didn't really feel like a good surprise, and I'm still left a little speechless. I didn't expect his wife to be found working with some fake army bozos, but bit of a letdown. I just hope the story gets more interesting from this point on, because this was more than a little disappointing. Anyway, the main story here at the militia is Sarah and Weaver are working on two different things, being napalm, and Sarah claims she's working on some biological weapon to kill the zombies, and due to them both working on things, we end up getting a load of fetch quests for quite a while, and it's honestly awful. Also, the relationship between Deacon and Sarah from this point on is rather strange. I know that they're trying to lay low and act like they're not married, but it definitely makes the story move by even slower from this point on. We did have an interesting fetch quest throughout this point where I ended up running into two different breakers at the same time. I tried to fight them, but I used literally everything I had and couldn't even take out one of them. So I died and restarted the mission and just snuck around there. During my random errands I was running for the militia, I got a call from some dork that I got sworn in with, and he needed me to save him. After kicking some ass, I managed to save him, and he was left without an ear. It was pretty gruesome. After this, we're back to just more boring fetch quests. This continued for way too long. This part of the game I think I actually hate. It was slowly giving me tidbits of info to keep me invested in the story, but I think I had to do well over 15 fetch quests throughout this, with barely any development in the storyline, and not a single interesting mission happening. The new characters also don't add enough to the story for me, so missing out on the whole Sarah, dead or alive mystery creates a pretty ass part of the game. There was one funny moment where Weaver was talking to Deacon about Sarah and mentioned she had a fine ass, which is funny, I guess, because that's his wife and he doesn't know. Yeah. We're really grasping at straws. I actually wrote down here that I'm left hoping something happens soon because this is a major slog. Extremely boring and grindy. I want to quit. And what do you know, right as soon as I was about to grow completely resentful to the game, we get an actual interesting story mission. I mean, it's a fetch quest, but Deacon gets to do it alongside Sarah. And as I've mentioned before throughout this video, anytime we get one character joining Deacon in the story for a mission, we get a lot of really interesting writing and conversation between the two characters that makes up for how samey some of the missions can be. Our breakthrough of the monotony started by Sarah bringing up to Deacon that she's looking for a centrifuge that could help her with her work, and there probably happens to be one at this community college nearby. So Deacon and Sarah went on a trip to go get it. The mission was really fantastic too. We had to keep finding our way to get through different parts of the school that was all locked down and killing a ton of freakers together. We got fairly interesting dialogue of the two characters talking to each other. And at the end of the mission, we actually get some passive storytelling where we noticed dozens of dead students in this room. It was really tragic, especially the writing on the board. I'll just let you see it for yourself. After this mission, I'm just left hoping that there will be more missions like this, and we can stay away from all the bounties and fetch quests. This mission did completely flip my outlook on the game though, going from resentful to positive. Anyway, I got back to camp and learned that the tailor guy I saved earlier with the ear gone and all that. Seemed to be doing pretty well, and now he was assigned to go ahead and take watch over the medical tent. We had a little conversation, and then I headed into the doctor's tent because he still had to check on my arm that was burnt earlier. He then asks Deacon if he can go on a mission with him, which sounded pretty cool. The doctor was a pretty cool character, but the colonel shows up and pretty much disavows him from ever leaving, saying he doesn't know what he'd do if he lost him because he's the only doctor possibly in the entire world. I think they're trying to push me to think that the colonel's crazy and won't let Sarah or Deke leave, but I'm unsure. I then get to gear up for another mission with Sarah. Just like I thought though, Colonel Matt shows up and says the same to Sarah, but eventually lets her leave anyway. She said she needed some other piece of equipment. She won't be able to finish her research without it. She didn't know where she could get it. Deacon's like, hey, you used to work at this crazy place called Cloverdale. Maybe they have it. And she's like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's go. Upon arriving though, we realized the whole facility still had running electricity and water, which was rather out of place. She then uses the scanner and gets allowed in. While entering, we get a little cutscene showing off one of the most annoying mobs in the game, being these zombie crows that wouldn't leave me alone throughout the whole second half of this game. I hate them. Other than that, though, we're left with a pretty cool mission where the two of them have to work together to fight their way inside this place, eventually learning that an old security guard had been living here with some crew. By the end, Sarah forces him to open the door to the research area, and she brutally shot the guy, which makes Deacon go like, what the f***? You're different now. No dude, there's been a whole apocalypse. But anyway, we're then offered the biggest piece of information I think the game has to offer throughout the whole story, being this.
God, David kept telling me. He kept telling me that something was wrong.
Okay. Who's David?
David Gorman. He was this research intern. He hacked the system. He got behind the firewall. He told me that this was some sort of classified project or something. I don't know.
Classified project. Just slow down and...
He wanted to be the next Edward Snowden. You see, he wanted to blow the lid off of this entire thing. David Gorman exposes the evil empire and saves the world and all that. And I didn't listen to him, Deacon. I told him that he was being paranoid. And he must have broken in here and then gotten some sample of whatever the hell they were cooking in here.
Well, I don't understand. What do you mean?
I pieced it together myself a little while later. The night that I was stabbed, I went to the Cloverdale office in Farewell, and I went to go try and find David, but he was already gone. He'd been gone for 2 weeks. There was this big green expo in Portland. He must have gone to see a reporter. He was probably infected and he didn't even know it yet. 2 days later, everybody at that conference was infected, and then they all got on planes and they went home. And a week later, 2.5 billion people were dead.
Sarah, this couldn't be your fault. I mean, you couldn't have stopped them.
You
How
don't
could you have stopped
understand. It's the research. My research was a part of this. Deacon, I was a part of this. They used me.
So yeah, bombshells dropped on us, and just like that, we learned that Sarah was involved with the people who made the virus that started all this, and some idiot thought that he could leak to the world that they're working on this and accidentally infects the whole world. Irony. Before leaving, Deacon tries to radio Lost Leak and tell them about all the food and stuff here, and couldn't get through for some reason. That definitely makes it come back later. While leaving, we get a few cutscenes of them hurriedly trying to leave and get somewhere safe before this winter storm hits. They end up staying in a log cabin on the way home over the night together. It's insinuated that the two become romantic again in this, which is good. I was hoping that Sarah wouldn't screw Deke over and that everything would end up being fine, and it seems to be so here. We get back to camp with some fantastic news, and it turns out the Taylor guy from earlier decided to murder the doctor and steal all the drugs right from under the colonel's nose. Guess it's not always as safe at camp as the colonel thinks. I'm left to assume that Sarah definitely won't be leaving with Deke again, so let's just hope we don't get any more fetch quests because of this. Deacon quickly recalls that the Taylor kid brought up that the ski lodge would be a really cool place to base up in the apocalypse and decides to go after him there. Before leaving though, we end up getting quite a few massive upgrades because we got to level up in trust, which was heavily needed at this point in the game because of how difficult it had gotten. I ended up being able to buy a 50 BMG sniper rifle, a Thompson machine gun, and a deagle, so we got pretty cool weapons on top of that. I was able to pretty quickly make my way through the ski resort, feeling like a complete badass with the new guns I found, and made my way all the way to Taylor. We get a cutscene where Taylor was crying about how he didn't want to be hanged, so Deacon did something rather weird here. He just injected him with the drugs he stole and overdosed him. I guess he felt bad. I don't know, it was weird. Getting back to camp though, Sarah ends up calling Deacon and says that she's finished the serum and had him go after and catch a newt, which required me to use a tranq gun and knock it out, then take it back to camp. Kind of a funny little mission. When I arrived back at camp with the newt, Captain Corey ends up telling him not to fraternize with Sarah, which is, haha, funny, they're married, huh. Anyway, he also mentioned that Weaver had just finished with his napalm, so I guess we'll be testing that out too. Anyway, I bring the newt to Sarah and she tests the serum. It seemed like it was working because it killed it, but turns out after all, she wasn't working on a bioweapon, she was trying to find a cure. Wow, how unexpected. I don't know how you couldn't see this one coming, noticing especially how she was acting every time she had to kill these zombies, especially the newts, and how she was trying to get this cure done before Weaver got his napalm done. I personally think that trying to cure these freakers is kind of messed up. I couldn't imagine being brought back from being a zombie that itself and 8 people and now I'm expected to just be a normal person again, but not even including the crazy injuries they received while being zombies. With this new knowledge in hand, Sarah and Deke start trying to think out a plan in order to escape the militia together. They come up with a plan that maybe they could work on a cure together at Cloverdale. I knew something would get in the way of this because the Colonel's a crazy and you can't just have a happy ending when there's so much that can happen still. The next mission we're offered is probably one of the most difficult in the game. Captain Curry and Deacon decide to go ahead and head out to go and test the napalm Molotov that Weaver was working on, and the best way they thought about testing it was against a massive horde. I'd only fought one horde up until this point, and it wasn't a very big one, so I really had my work cut out for me. The horde mechanic in this game is actually pretty awesome, and this mission really tries to teach you how to take them on. It tries to let you know that if you can get them in tight areas, close together, and throw throwables at them, you can get a load of kills. I have to admit, it took me a couple tries to actually get this done, but it is by far one of the most exhilarating experiences I've ever had in a video game, and it's super satisfying seeing hundreds of dead zombies on the ground when you're done. I can't recall a single past experience I've had in a game where hundreds of enemies that are just as fast as you, maybe not as because you can run, but you only have a limited amount of stamina. If they catch you though, you're so screwed because they're just all gonna grab onto you and encircle you. It's a horde. You're running away, shooting explosives, blowing things up, trying to just slow them down. It almost feels like a life or death situation, but in a video game. It was done really well. I can't really possibly say anything more positive about it. They did everything perfect. Plus, let's talk about how satisfying it is to go grab all the bounties off of all the dead zombies when you're done killing the horde. Seeing that number tick up like 135 new ones or something, it's awesome. Anyway, after clearing them out, Deacon tried to go ahead and radio Sarah and she didn't pick up. Seems like something fishy's probably happening with old Colonel. When I got back to camp, I learned that everyone's favorite self-righteous Colonel here decided to lock Weaver and Sarah up inside the camp in order to protect them. He has them doing all their work in the cave system at camp, which he calls the Ark, referencing the Bible because he's super religious in a weird way though. Honestly, a pretty creepy way. It does suck because I was having a lot of fun doing the missions for with the people around camp. I don't think the developers thought through how you're gonna go from like making me kill a horde, which is by far the most fun thing to do in the game, to being sent back to fetch purgatory. Oh well. Anyway, Deke ends up radioing O'Brien and asks him for help, seeing if maybe he could help get Sarah out of camp with his helicopter. But before that, O'Brien said he needed something from Deke first. But wait, I called it. The Colonel and Weaver both sent me on fetch quests. So did Sarah. I hate being an errand boy. Weaver wanted an MP3 player, kinda dumb. And Colonel wanted his old Bible. I mean, I don't know why the guy even reads the Bible. He should probably write his own with how much he judges everyone. Knowing me, the first one I went to was the quest for O'Brien because these fetch quests suck. During this quest, he wanted me to track down a specific zombie and do a biopsy on it. As it turns out, this freaker is showing a bunch of signs of mutating extremely fast. O'Brien said something like 1,000,000 years of evolution in a matter of days or something. I don't know, the same they've been saying since the beginning. And of course, the freaker they needed me to go check out was hiding in a cave, and some of the Nero people were already sent to do this, and they went missing inside of it. Doesn't sound good. Kind of scary. Last time I was in a cave where there were a bunch of freakers, it had me worried the whole time, so let's go again. I figured out during this mission that I actually had a good right to be this worried, because after I found and beat the new zombie, which was kind of cool, it was called a Reacher, and it was actually stupidly fast, but afterwards, there was a nice horde that showed up, and I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of an easy fight. I don't think the horde was too large, but it was terrifying to be stuck and lost in a giant dark cave and having a giant horde chasing after you. Overall, pretty cool mission. I do wish you would have run into more Reachers throughout the end of the game. I didn't run into another one. kind of made me sad. But finishing up with one of the last few cool quests of the game, I then went and did some more exciting fetch quests. I should mention that one of them, I had to go get some hemlock for Sarah. For some reason, she needed some poison that will probably play a part in the story. Anyway, when I returned the items, Deacon let Sarah know the next time she sees him to be ready because they're getting the out of there. Before Deacon left, she ended up giving him a note, which she usually gives him to go do a fetch quest, but this time it just said, "I never stopped loving you," which was cute. After leaving and restocking on ammo and fuel, I went to my next mission, and it said, "Help Sarah escape Wizard Island," which got me super excited, especially when I read the warning before the mission stating it will temporarily lock me out of the southern region of the map. But while Sarah and Deke were escaping, Weaver ends up being really cool and lets them get past him. He's just a bro, I like him. But after making their way all the way through the arc, things went really bad here. I'll just play the cutscene.
Oh, Lieutenant, I've just been giving this group of new recruits a tour of the island. Oh, we're just about to go down into the Ark. You should join us. Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Whitaker. She heads up part of the research team that's exploring ways to use poison to defeat our enemies.
Traitor!
Wait,
Stay back! All right. I'm listening.
I am telling you, he is a spy.
Matt, this guy's crazy. You've never seen him before.
Lieutenant,
He comes out of nowhere and you're gonna believe
What's
him?
that camp you're saying I'm from?
You think
Lost
I'm lying?
what the
Is
fuck?
that it? I'm not lying. Have him show us your back. Huh? Show us your back.
Enough!
He wasn't wearing a shirt. Son of a bitch has a tattoo covering his back. Some satanic, it's some kind of dog, a dead dog chewing through a chain or something, like it was nothing. I pulled him off her. He was drunk and we fought like hell, but who knows what wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been.
Sorry, Colonel, he's just so crazy. Turn. You wear the image of Cerberus, the Hound of Hades. How fitting that you were discovered ascending from the underworld. But you are not Cerberus, are you? Deacon St. John. You hide behind angelic names and call yourself a lie! He got kicked out of the You are And what about you, Lieutenant? How convenient that you were with the Drifter when the Nero helicopter came by.
Colonel, I do not know what you're talking about.
You were in a Nero camp that was overrun. How long have you been spying on us? How long?
Matt, I promise, I haven't been.
Lies! I expect men like him to betray me. An officer? Colonel. It was me! It was me. Colonel, I lied. I called him and I lied. I lied to the lieutenant. I told her that I needed her to help me check a shipment, but the truth is I just needed a hostage.
Deacon St. John, Drifter, are you there? This is Nero. This is O'Brien, Drifter.
I'm sorry. Corporal St. John is unavailable right now.
Wait, who is this?
Release Private, Sarkowski, was it?
Yeah.
Take this Drifter to lockup. Tomorrow at 0700, he will stand trial. And he will hang. Tell me more about this Lost Lake camp.
Yes, sir. Anything you want to know?
Lieutenant?
So, after that, I honestly cannot wait to watch Deacon murder the Colonel and Schizo. I'm pretty pissed off. I was kind of hoping to get away, but in the back of my head, I knew that they were going to try to wrap the story around a Lost Lake due to the way that they kicked him out earlier. As soon as the Colonel starts harping on and on about Judgment Day and locks Deke up, they knock him out. And we're awoken, but turns out Captain Curry is also a cool guy, and he lets Deacon go. He ends up explaining that he also thought the Colonel was losing his and all I gotta say, what a guy. Convenient, but what a guy. Deacon refuses to leave with Captain Curry and pretty much tells him, nah, dude, I gotta save this chick. And we get a mission where we have to escape the South. During this, I had to stop off at several places and fight militia members. It was actually pretty fun. The suspense was kind of turned up to 10 because Deacon learned the militia were going off to attack the North. which probably means Lost Lake since it's the most south in the north. Deacon keeps trying to radio into Lost Lake and can't get a hold of them for some reason. Like I talked about earlier, that plays a role. The Colonel did say it was his plan to take out all the sinners and drug addicts and I don't know, he's power hungry, so I should have expected him going up north. Anyway, we make our way back to Lost Lake. When I get there, the fight was already over. This is the second time that's happened. It kind of sucks, but there was a big casualty, that of Iron Mike. He actually managed to apologize to Deacon before dying. I don't really care that he died. I'm actually excited. It's a pretty cool thing. It was almost a reward for the reveals and fetch quests to see Iron Mike bleed out and die. God, that character was so poorly written. He ends up telling Deacon he trusts him to run the place, and it's strange. It's cool he admitted he was wrong, but he acted like a crackhead, and I can't say that if I were Deacon I'd forgive him for being such an annoying character. And I think Lost Lake is probably a lot better without him. Definitely shouldn't have been called Iron Mike, because he ruled more like Cotton Mike, like something soft. Very soft man. Afterwards, Deke tries to take control of the situation, but showed he doesn't really have the ability to lead, knowing his wife is trapped in a cave with an absolute lunatic. So we then move on to plan an attack against the militia before they could work up the strength and bring another attack to us. The plan they came up with was to build a big truck bomb with fertilizer and something called creosote. At this point in the game, I have to go ahead and talk about how I was just trying to get through it. I was probably, 50 hours deep at this point, maybe a little bit more, and due to all the Radiant camp quests and fetch quests, I just really wanted to see how this game ended. I feel like a lot of people that played this game probably got to this point and were also annoyed with how slow certain parts of the game got. Maybe that would explain the negative reviews that I saw early. I still don't understand the hate for this game, and we're almost done with it. We're moved along, and it turns out Ricky and Boozer were able to get a big truck to hold all the fertilizer and such, but Deacon needed to go out and find out where he could find the fertilizer and creosote. The first place I had to go was to go find some fertilizer, and let me tell you, the hordes are nowhere near done yet. In order to get both the fertilizer and the creosote, I had to take on two pretty big-ass hordes, which, again, took me another couple tries because these things are fairly difficult. On the first mission, Schizo decides to call me and radio in to get under Deke's skin. He claims he was promoted to captain in replace of Corey, and they were going to kill Sarah or something. I mean, it's honestly just like listening to the Colonel. They're both wackos rambling. They really deserve each other. The first horde I took on wasn't too bad, though. I think most of the difficulty of fighting these hordes actually just comes down to me playing on hard. Anyway, after getting the fertilizer, I had to do 4 random fetch quests just to be able to do the next one. I think that they did this at this point so that you would go and collect more resources to build throwables for the next horde. I'm kind of unsure. I just hate doing these missions, and they add nothing to the story, so f them. Even though I did these and I was able to build up a little bit of resources to craft, I didn't have nearly as many throwables like napalm. Actually, I didn't have any napalm. And it made the creosote mission way, way harder. I eventually figured out a way that I could cheese the mission by running over there, sniping at the horde, then running away, and for some reason their AI would run back to where they came from. It took a little while, but I was actually able to get it done like this. So now the truck bomb is finished. The mission now is to go murder every militia who sided with Colonel Matt, and to go ahead and save everyone who didn't. This mission was built up to be some big fight with all the people of Lost Lake helping you, but it really didn't turn out that way. Let's start from the beginning. First, Boozer ends up giving Deacon back his MC jacket, which was a nice ending to their storyline. And then it was time to go ahead and ride off and kill the assholes. The game tries to make you think that Boozer dies here when he drives the truck bomb into the gate, and I just had to fight my way through the arc knowing that. The fighting was the most difficult so far between Deacon and humans, and I kind of enjoyed that. Anyway, I eventually made my way all the way down to Schizo and saved Weaver, but then I got a cutscene of Deke and Schizo fighting each other, leading to Deke doing this. Next up, it was time to go after the Colonel, and I think this cutscene's better than I could really ever communicate it, so here you go.
Let him go, Colonel. It's all over. Your militia is done.
Would you like some tea? I'm sure you would. Sarah, would you pour the Drifter a cup of tea? The Ark was our only hope. You realize that, of course. When the world was cleansed, it was the only thing that would allow us to rebuild. Everything was here. Protected. Saved by the grace of God. We never did find someone to play the piano, though, did we? When all this is gone, there'll be nobody left to hear the music. You've destroyed us.
No, Colonel, you did when you started this holy war. You know, given the choice between you and the freaks, I'm gonna have to go with them, because at least when they kill, they're just looking for a meal, and they don't kill unarmed women.
No!
Now, watching him die was probably the best ending I could have asked for. What an insufferable douchebag. So this game automatically gained brownie points from me just because of that. After seeing the Colonel die, everyone heads down and Deke gives a pretty nice speech around a fire. It kind of bothered me due to how quiet he was talking the whole time, but after the speech ends, we get shown the Boozer actually survived. Who would have known? Anyway, the game's pretty much over, and I got a nice credit scene of everyone riding off happy, and it was pretty good. There were a few storylines throughout the story that I never got to completely finish. Most of them were like bounty missions where you had to go kill some guy at a camp or clear a camp out. Nothing super important. There was one that I'd like to show you now.
What can I do for you, O'Brien?
I'm here to warn you.
Warn me about what?
You remember? I told you the infected were evolving.
Right, yeah, freak's a freak. What the hell do I care?
The strain of the virus, its effects on the human nervous and lymphatic systems is accelerating.
At an exponential rate.
They knew all along, of course, that it was happening. The men above me, that's why they were so cautious. So secretive.
Come on. I'm sorry.
There's nothing you can do to stop them. There's nothing anyone can do.
Now, I don't think this is actually canon because the second game got canceled, but honestly, really freaky. I don't even know how to explain that. That's just terrifying seeing the way that O'Brien hops back into the helicopter. So yeah, that was Days Gone. And now that it's been several days since I've completed the game, and I honestly want to say I really enjoyed it. Even though we had slow, boring parts that really drag, there is still a beautiful world there that's chock full of a bunch of to do. The stories are very fantastic, and some of them are really top-notch in video games. I mean, I must add that I don't play a lot of story-rich video games. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the last ones that I tried that I really enjoyed. I'm much more of an RPG guy myself. This game really resonated with me in several different ways. I'm left to assume that the game must have been a really buggy mess at the time of release because I don't understand all the hate that was here. Anything that would seem silly at first about the game, like Deacon and Boozer being in a motorcycle club straight out of Sons of Anarchy, it actually transferred pretty well into the game and story. I really was disappointed by the letdown of Deke's wife being revealed, but it did lead to a pretty solid ending of everything kind of working out, and a great revenge tale. There were a few storylines that I wish could have been maybe progressed or added to more, like Ricky and Addie or some of the other camp members, but I like that the ending's pretty positive and bright and happy until that O'Brien cutscene anyway. I would like to say that I had an absolute blast playing this game, and I spent way too many days of doing 8, 10, 12-hour days because I just wanted to play this game the whole time. I was actually having a blast writing notes and playing it, which is pretty uncommon for most of the games I play. Usually it's just I want to get to the end of it. This one was I'm having a lot of fun playing it. There were so many things I liked about this game, I couldn't possibly mention them here. I feel like I talked about the things I didn't like, so you could just chalk most of the up that I just randomly glazed over as stuff I did like. My notes did get pretty negative for a certain minute there, but I think that the game's honestly great. I'd give it probably an 8.5 out of 10. If it weren't for the slow parts, it could be higher. Maybe I'm already rating it too high, but I think an 8.5 is pretty good for a game like this. I can't possibly rate it any higher than that, though, due to the fact that I'll never be able to go back and replay this game. I just don't want to experience the slow parts again. And I know the ending of the story, so there's not really anything that's going to be pulling me along, being like, I wonder what's next. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and you give me a like. I worked really hard on this video, grinding out over 60 hours of gameplay in a few days, and writing this took quite a while due to me having to take breaks to figure out which direction I wanted to take it, but I had a lot of fun going back over the game in my head to put it on paper, and this was a really positive experience. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think about it down below. Days Gone forever.